He mobilized an entire army for her, closed every gate, sent cavalry to all 4 provinces, shut down the kingdom before dawn, all for a secretary no one had ever noticed leaving. For 3 years, Kaelinder Voss sat 5 steps from the king and wrote down every word he said. His habits, his silences, the way his left temple always ached first. She knew him better than anyone in the palace. He didn't know her name. So on the night of his betrothal banquet, she left. Quietly, deliberately, the way she had always done everything. No scene, no tears. Just 7 words written in the margin of a ledger, placed in the center of an empty desk. I hope he sleeps well without me. By midnight, he had woken in a cold sweat, walls crumbling, the entire palace flooding through him, with nothing to stop it. What had she unknowingly been to him all along? And why did losing her feel like losing the ability to breathe? The torches had been burning since midnight. Kaelinder Voss knew this because she had counted them. 7 new ones along the north wall, 3 more flanking the postern gate, their light turning the falling snow amber before it vanished into the dark. She stood in the doorway of the records corridor and watched the courtyard fill with horses, breath steaming from their nostrils like small white ghosts, hooves punching black holes into the fresh snow. Something had happened. She did not yet know what, but the rhythm of the palace had changed, the way weather changes, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small wrongnesses. The wrong number of guards, the wrong direction of their movement, the wrong hour for so many lanterns to be lit. She should go back to her room. She turned instead toward the great hall. The hall's iron chandeliers threw shadows long and unsteady across the stone floor. Kael stopped at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe, and found him. King Aldrich Vane stood at the center of the room in his battle clothes, not the ceremonial armor he wore for audiences, but the worn, functional steel of a man who had been somewhere else in his mind all evening and simply had not changed. He faced the high windows, his back to the 6 advisors hovering uncertainly at the room's edges. His shoulders were very still, the kind of stillness that takes effort. Finn stood 3 paces behind the king, arms loose at his sides, watching him the way a man watches a fire he isn't sure has finished burning. Kael had worked in this court for 3 years. She had sat in dozens of rooms with Aldrich Vane and learned to read the language of his spine the way she read Old Latin, slowly at first, then with increasing fluency. She had catalogued the difference between his thinking stillness and his controlled fury stillness, between the set of his jaw when he was bored and when he was 3 seconds from ending a conversation with a single word. She had never seen this before. His right hand opened and closed at his side. Opened. Closed. He is afraid, some part of her recognized, and the recognition landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, rings spreading outward before she could stop them. She took 1 step back and stopped. Find her. 2 words, pitched low, addressed to no one in particular and everyone at once. The voice of a man who had worn authority so long it lived in his throat like a second heartbeat. No anger in it, no volume, just the flat, absolute certainty of a command that would be obeyed. Finn moved immediately. Kael pressed herself against the corridor wall and held her breath until the footsteps passed. Then she stood alone in the dark, listening to the sound of the palace reorganizing itself around a single absence, and understood, with the cold, exact clarity that had always been her particular curse, exactly who was gone. She walked back to her own room without a lamp. She knew this corridor by the sound of it, by the way the draft changed at the 4th turning, by the loose stone 2 steps before the records annex door. 3 years of late nights had mapped it into her feet without her permission. She moved through the dark as she had always moved through this palace, quietly, efficiently, leaving no impression on the air. Her room was exactly as she had left it an hour ago, the lamp still burning on the desk, the evening's final transcript half finished beside the inkwell. The gray wool of her spare dress folded on the chair. She sat on the edge of the bed and did not light a second lamp. She had been seeing things about him for 3 years that she had never intended to notice. The way he braced his left temple with 2 fingers when the council sessions ran long. The way he read reports from the bottom of the pile rather than the top. The way his gray eyes went somewhere distant and unreachable when certain border territories were mentioned in dispatches. Small things. Useless things. She had written them in the margins of her private notebooks in the lightest ink she owned, as if making them faint might unmake the noticing itself. Silver gray, she had written once, trying to describe his eyes, then scratched it out. The color of old ice, she had tried, then scratched that out too. She had left the entry blank. Some things lost their quality the moment you pinned them to a page. She was still sitting in the dark when she heard the footsteps stop outside her door. 3 sharp knocks. She rose. Finn stood in the doorway with a ledger in his hands. Her ledger. The council transcript book, which she recognized by the wear on its spine and the ink stain at the lower right corner that had been there since March. His expression was the one she had seen only twice before in 3 years. The careful blankness of a man who has just understood something he wishes he hadn't. He looked at her. Then he looked at the ledger. Then back at her. "Kale," he said. Just her name. Just that. She left something. His voice was even. Finn's voice was always even. It was one of the qualities that made him dangerous. "Her room is empty. Everything gone except this. He'll want to know if you—" He stopped, looked at her more carefully. He wants all senior staff who knew her movements, her patterns. Kale held his gaze for a moment. "I'll come," she said. Finn nodded once, and something in his expression shifted. A small, involuntary acknowledgement, there and gone before it could be named. He turned, and she followed him down the dark corridor toward whatever was coming next. 8 months before. The first thing Kale had learned about the king was that he did not look at his own reflection. She had noticed this during her 3rd week at court, when she was still new enough to notice everything, and unimportant enough that no one noticed her noticing. The silver mirror in the council antechamber had been repositioned by the household staff, moved to catch the morning light, and she had watched Aldrich Vane walk past it twice without a single glance, the way a man walks past a wall he has decided does not exist. She had written in her notebook, "Does not look at mirrors. Self-consciousness? Or something else." She had crossed out self-consciousness and left the rest. That had been 8 months ago. She had filled 3/4 of the notebook since then, with observations she told herself were professional. A good secretary learned her principal's patterns, his preferences, his habits of mind. That was simply good practice. It was simply doing her job well. She told herself this with great conviction on the nights when she lay awake, cataloging the specific shade of his eyes in firelight versus window light versus the blue-gray wash of an overcast noon. And the conviction held, mostly, and she was 23 years old and had learned very early that some truths were best kept in the lightest ink you owned. The night of the wound came in late autumn. The council had run long. A border dispute. 3 lords who disagreed about everything, including which direction the sun rose. And the hall had emptied slowly, advisors gathering their papers with the tired precision of men who would not sleep well. Kale stayed, as she always stayed. Transcripts were best completed while the words were fresh, and she worked best in the quiet after everyone else had gone, the fire burning low, the scratch of her pen the only sound in the room. She was halfway down the 3rd page when the side door opened. A young soldier came in first, barely 18, still wearing the expression of someone who had not yet learned to arrange his face into professional neutrality. Behind him, Aldrich Vane. She rose automatically and then went very still. There was blood on his left shoulder, dark against the gray wool of his coat, spreading in a slow, irregular shape from a point near the top of his arm. He was holding himself carefully, the slight forward tilt of someone managing pain by distributing its weight across the body. But his face showed nothing. Not a wince, not a tightening around the eyes. The same controlled blankness she had seen when difficult reports arrived in council. Armor worn over armor. "Mira is needed on the 3rd floor," the soldier said, his voice cracking slightly on 3rd. "An accident in training. The shard caught. She can't come for 20 minutes and—" He stopped, looked at Kale. The question he couldn't quite form hung in the air between them. She was already moving toward the supply cabinet in the corner. The room was very quiet. She had dragged the stool to the side of his chair and set the medical case open on the table. He had his back to her, left arm resting on the wood, and he had not spoken since coming through the door, and neither had she, and the silence had settled between them with a naturalness she was careful not to examine. She dipped the cloth into the clean water. "Do you know how to dress a wound?" His voice was calm and specific, a man asking about something practical. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good." She pulled the fabric aside. The cut was longer than she'd hoped, running from below the shoulder blade to the outer curve of the arm, clean-edged, already hot at its borders. Not deep enough to be dangerous, but deep enough to require proper binding. She had done this before, in the Thornmere orphanage where she had grown up, where there were always children who fell and cut themselves on the broken paned windows the matron kept promising to fix. She had learned early that the trick was not speed, but evenness, steady pressure, no hesitation, the hands telling the wounded body that this was being managed, this was being resolved. Her hands knew how. They moved with the same evenness now. Beneath her fingertips, through the cloth and the warm skin below it, she felt the muscle of his shoulder tighten when she reached the worst of the cut. Not a flinch. Smaller than a flinch. The body's involuntary truth. The kind of thing only someone with their hands directly on the surface would feel. He was in pain. He simply was not performing pain. In front of a secretary, she thought, and the thought arrived with an unexpected tenderness that she had no framework for, so she set it aside and kept working. 4 minutes. She had counted them the way she counted everything. Not intentionally, but because her mind moved that way, finding patterns, keeping small accounts. 4 minutes of absolute silence while she cleaned and dried and laid the bandage. 4 minutes in which the fire settled twice, and outside the window the wind lifted and somewhere deep in the palace, a door closed with a distant, definitive sound. His head was turned slightly away from her. Not enough to be rude, just enough that she could see the line of his jaw, the particular set of it, the way the candle shadows moved across his cheekbone. She had seen this face in profile at dozens of council meetings. She had never been this close to it. Close enough now to see a scar at his left temple. Thin, old, long-heeled, half hidden by the dark fall of his hair. She had not known about that scar. She felt the knowledge of it arrive in some part of her that kept a record she had not authorized, and she went on working. She was tying off the last fold of bandage when the back of her finger grazed the edge of the linen against his skin. He drew a breath. Quiet, nearly inaudible, swallowed before it could become anything. Not pain. She did not look up. She finished the knot with the same steady hands she had maintained throughout, and took one deliberate step back. "Done, Your Majesty. The wound is clean. 5 days, if you don't stress the shoulder." A pause. He looked down at the bandage. Then he looked up, and his eyes found hers with an effort that suggested finding her required looking, that she was not simply part of the furniture of his peripheral awareness, as she had always assumed. "Thank you." A beat. His mouth forming the next word with a slight hesitation, the way a person pronounces a word they have read many times and are only now saying aloud. Voss. She had heard her own name her entire life. She had never heard it like that, weighted, tentative, as if he were learning the shape of it in his mouth. Mira came through the door 40 seconds later, and the small, sealed world that had formed in the quiet of the room cracked open and let the ordinary evening back in. Kale returned to her corner. She picked up her pen. She looked at the half-finished transcript. The words blurred once, then resolved. Her hands had not shaken. She would be proud of that later, in the full honesty of her room with the candle burning down to the stub. Her hands had not shaken. She did not sleep that night. Not from hope. She had learned years ago that hope, in certain directions, was a luxury she could not afford. The way a person walking a narrow mountain path cannot afford to look at the view. The path required the path. She lay in the dark and understood that she had made an error. She had allowed herself to get close enough to feel his shoulder tense under her hands, to hear the breath he tried to swallow, to stand near enough to see a scar she had not known existed. And all of these things had taken up residence in her body in a way that would not be easily evicted. She opened her notebook to a clean page and, in the lightest ink she owned, wrote, "I must be more careful." She closed the notebook and lay in the dark and told herself it was a professional observation, a correction to be made. In the morning, she walked into the council chamber. He was already seated, reading from the bottom of his dispatch pile. He did not look up. She sat in her corner, opened her transcript book, and picked up her pen. Yes, she thought. There it is. Exactly that. The betrothal announcement came 6 weeks later. Aldous Crane set a document on the table and said, without ceremony, "The matter of succession can no longer be deferred." He laid out the case for an alliance with House Marchant in the same measured cadence with which he might have presented a trade negotiation. The strategic logic was sound. Cale wrote it all down without looking at the king, because looking at the king during moments that mattered caused the pen to wobble, and she was a secretary, and her handwriting was the one thing in this court that belonged entirely to her. "Arrange a meeting," the king said. The pen kept moving. Beneath the table, her other hand pressed flat against her thigh, feeling the coarse wool of her dress. Something real, something present, something that was simply cloth and had no opinion about anything. She transcribed the full session after the hall emptied, read it back once, made 3 small corrections, closed the book. The fire had burned to orange coals. The snow outside the high windows was very white. She went to bed. Lady Isolde Marchant arrived 6 days later. She was the kind of beautiful that came from certainty. The particular radiance of a woman who had always known she was beautiful and had simply moved forward from that fact, making use of it without being defined by it. Copper-bright hair, a green gown the exact shade of winter fur, and dark eyes that moved through a room the way a general's eyes move through unfamiliar terrain, gathering information, filing it, deciding. She smiled at Aldrich when they were introduced. He inclined his head. The formal conversation that followed was careful and correct and entirely without warmth. And Cale noticed, as she noticed everything, that Lady Isolde noticed this too. That evening, at the welcoming banquet, Cale sat at the lower table in her gray dress and watched the torchlight move. She held a cup of wine she had not touched. She kept her eyes on the flames. She was almost entirely successful. She had gone to the balcony for the cold, for the simple removal of herself from the music and voices and the weight of the hall pressing in from all sides. The stone railing was dusted with snow that the wind kept lifting and resettling. Below, the city of Ashenvale spread its 1,000 lights across the dark mountain valley. "You are Voss." She turned. Lady Isolde stood at the balcony's far end, wine cup held loosely at her side, her breath making brief white clouds in the cold. She was looking out at the city with the expression of someone reading a complicated contract, thoughtful, unhurried, reserving judgment. "Yes, my lady." 3 years you've worked for him. Not a question. "Yes." Isolde turned her head slightly. The torchlight from the open doors caught the red gold of her hair. "Does he have peculiarities I should know? The ones that don't appear in diplomatic summaries." Cale understood at once that this was a test. Whether of loyalty, or intelligence, or candor, she was not certain. She answered with the truth, because deception required a sustained investment she had never been willing to spend on anything that wasn't the work itself. He doesn't sleep before major campaigns. He drinks tea rather than wine when the sessions run difficult. Bitter, not sweet. He reads dispatches from least to most urgent, rather than the reverse. A pause. When he has made a final decision, he stops arguing the point entirely. Most people mistake this for agreement. Isolde was quiet for a moment. You know him well. I have written down everything he has said for 3 years. That is not the same thing as knowing someone. No, Cale agreed. It isn't. Below, a lute was playing, the notes drifting up thin and bright through the cold air. And yet, Isolde said, none of what you just described appears in any diplomatic summary. She turned to look at Cale directly, and her dark eyes were neither unkind nor dishonest. He doesn't know your name, does he? The cold was doing something to Cale's chest. She kept her face still. No, she said. Isolde looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she looked back at the city. I'm sorry, Voss, she said quietly. She did not explain what she was sorry for. She didn't need to. Cale set her wine cup on the railing and went back inside. She stood at the door of the hall and looked toward the high table one last time. Aldrich was scanning the room, the guard captain's habit he had never been able to fully unmake, even as king. His eyes swept the lower tables in a smooth, practiced arc. They moved across her, the way wind moves through a field and doesn't know what it bends. The way light crosses a surface without warming it. There, she thought, and felt something in her chest give way. Not dramatically, not with any sound. Just the quiet surrender of something that had been holding on for a very long time. She set her cup down and left without looking back. Her room was cold. She had not lit the fire before leaving, and the embers had died long ago. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and pressed her hands flat against her thighs. Proximity is not possession. She had told herself this before. She told herself this now with greater precision. Standing next to fire does not mean the fire knows you are there. 3 years of his voice. 3 years of his handwriting on documents she transcribed. His pauses and his cadences and the specific rhythm of how he thought out loud in council. 3 years of knowing which muscle in his jaw tightened when a report contained something he had not expected. Of knowing the left temple always ached before the right. Of knowing that when he said, "We will consider it," in a particular tone, the matter was as finished as if he had written it in law. 3 years of being 4 steps away from the most recognized face in the kingdom and being, to that face, a piece of furniture. She had known this. She had catalogued it alongside all the other facts about him, kept it in the appropriate column. It had simply taken tonight to understand what the column meant. She opened the desk drawer and took out the ledger. She turned to the last page, the final entry she had written that afternoon, the betrothal protocol, neat and complete in her best hand. She dipped her pen, and in the margin below the last line she wrote, "I hope he sleeps well without me." She read it once. It was small and true and a little mean, and she did not care. She closed the ledger, set it in the center of the desk, and began to pack. He woke at midnight with his hands fisted in the coverlet. Not from a dream. He rarely dreamed anymore. The curse had taken that, too, replacing the dark of sleep with a low, continuous signal. Other people's emotions seeping through the walls and the floors and the stone itself like groundwater. Most nights he could hold it at distance enough to rest. Most nights the long habit of control was sufficient. Not tonight. A young guard on the north wall, 19 years old, his first solo night watch in a blizzard, the dark pressing in from all sides, was terrified, and Aldrich felt that terror in his own chest, as if it were his own. Indistinguishable, except for the way it didn't quite fit the shape of his ribcage. Beneath it, a cook's grief. A father dead 3 days ago, the news just arrived by messenger. Beneath that, A soldier's small, stubborn fury over something private and unresolvable. He pressed his left temple. Always the left, first. He sat in the dark and sorted through the noise with practiced attention, laying it out, setting it aside, trying to find the floor of it. The grief. The fear. The soldier's anger. The ordinary, complicated feelings of a palace, holding 500 lives and all their weather. Something was missing. He went very still. For 7 years, since Ravenmoor, since Vel's curse had settled into him like a second skeleton, there had been a quiet place. He had thought it was his own making, a small space he had carved out through sheer habit of will, a corner of the world where the noise receded enough for him to think. He had believed this, had been grateful for it, without examining the source of his gratitude. He understood now, at midnight, with the coverlet in his fists, that the quiet place had been shaped by someone, that it had the precise dimensions and temperature of a particular absence, that it was gone. He was out of bed before he had finished the thought. Finn was in the corridor. He was always near the corridor. This quality of perpetual, watchful availability was the thing that made him indispensable and slightly unsettling in equal measure. "The secretary," Aldrich said. His voice came out oddly flat. "Voss. Where is she?" The careful blankness moved across Finn's face like a shutter closing. He was gone for 11 minutes. He came back with a ledger. "Her room is empty." Finn held the book out. His expression was the one he reserved for truths the king needed to hear and would not enjoy. "She left this on her desk." Aldrich took the ledger. He turned to the last page. His own words, the formal language of the betrothal protocol, written in her clear, even hand. And below the final line, in the same hand, "I hope he sleeps well without me." He read it twice. On the third second, the walls came down. All of them, at once. The structures he had spent 7 years building, reinforcing, maintaining with the obsessive precision of a man who understood that his sanity depended on them. 500 people flooded back in, unfiltered. Grief, hunger, boredom, longing. The low, sustained anxiety of the night watch. A child's dream fear somewhere in the servants' quarters. The cook, still awake and weeping quietly in the dark kitchen below. All of it, all at once, like a wave breaking over something that had never been built to withstand it. The gap in the noise was shaped exactly like her absence. He had been using her, unknowing, for 3 years, drawing from some quality she carried, without understanding what it was or where it came from. And now she was gone, and he was standing in the dark, holding a ledger with 7 words in it, and the entire palace was pouring through him with nothing to stop it. He stood very still while the wave broke. Then, quietly and precisely, "Wake the guards, all of them. Close every gate." Finn was already moving. "Find her." By morning, the search had become a campaign. Soren confirmed which gate she had used, the north postern, in the small hours while the banquet occupied the main guard. A merchant coming in at first light had seen a woman on foot heading east toward Millhaven. Small pack, dark hair, steady pace, no hesitation at any fork. Aldrich stood over the map table and pressed 2 fingers against his left temple, with the same involuntary precision he had maintained for 7 years, and said nothing. Finn set a piece of paper on the map. "I have been keeping records for 2 years. His voice was the flat, patient tone of a man who has been watching something long enough that his patience has calcified into something harder. "This is what they show." The paper was a table. Dates in one column, severity in the second, a scale from 1 to 5. And in the third column, notes. Kale present, 4-hour session, Kale adjacent, Kale ill, 2nd floor, Kale on leave. "The severity correlates," Finn said, "with her presence and her absence. That is not, Your Majesty, not unkind. Unmoving. You have mobilized 2 cavalry divisions and shut down every gate in Ashenvale, over a secretary leaving her post. I am simply observing that you have never done this before. The room was quiet. Mira came through the side door, half-dressed, medical bag already in hand, wearing the expression of someone who expects to be needed and is rarely wrong about it. She examined him briefly, pulse, eyes, the pressure point at his temple that she had been monitoring for 3 years. Bond severance, she said. Partial. The mate link formed without either of you recognizing it. Her proximity has been suppressing the curse, not curing it. Suppressing it. When she left, the bond was severed, incompletely. She paused. This is unpleasant for both parties. She's feeling this. Physical pain, disorientation, increasing weakness. She will not understand why. A beat. She also does not know you learned her name. He turned away from the table. The sound from the doorway was controlled, a deliberate clearing of the throat that carried considerable weight. Lady Isolde Marchant stood in the frame, copper hair properly pinned, green dress immaculate, wearing the expression of a woman who has assessed a room and decided she has earned the right to speak plainly into it. I spoke with her last night, she said. She came in and closed the door. On the balcony, she told me things about you that your intended, did not know. That you drink bitter tea when the sessions are difficult. That you read dispatches from the bottom. That when you've truly decided something, you stop arguing. She looked at him steadily. She has been watching you for 3 years, with the attention most people reserve for things they love. The room did not move. And you, Isolde said, without cruelty, looked at the lower tables twice during our betrothal banquet. I counted. Aldrich said nothing. Isolde smoothed her dress with one hand. Go. The mate bond supersedes any political contract. My father is an alpha. He understands this law better than your lawyers. I will handle Lord Marchant. There will be a trade agreement. Crane will complain and then realize he has secured the Western Seaways without sacrificing the alliance, which is the better outcome anyway. She moved toward the door. But first, she stopped, looked back. She was 4 steps from you for 3 years. She wrote every word you said. You thanked her once, by accident, because you were in pain and she was the only one there. A pause. Learn her name, the whole name. Say it until it sits naturally in your mouth. She left. The room reorganized itself around the silence she left behind. Kaelindra, Aldrich said. Finn watched him from across the table. Kaelindra Voss. The syllables were strange. The way a word you have read but never spoken is strange, carrying a meaning that has existed in your mind without ever existing in your voice. He said it again, quietly. Found the weight of it, where it fell. Her things were packed neatly, Finn said, after a moment. The books weren't hers. She left them. The ledger placed in the center of the desk. She was not in distress when she left. He paused. She was very deliberate. Saddle the horses. Soren is already at the stable. They left through the north gate as the sun cleared the mountains. 3 horses, 3 men, moving east into the white morning. Soren had found the footprints in Millhaven, small, evenly spaced, not pausing at the crossroads. He pointed at them without dismounting. Steady gait. She knew where she was going. He straightened and looked east. That was all he said. The curse came at Aldrich in waves as they passed through each village, the accumulated emotional weather of settlements waking into their mornings. Farmers carrying worry about the late freeze. A woman at a window with the particular stillness of grief. Children's bright, uncomplicated feelings, cutting through the rest like light through smoke. He bore it the way he had borne it for 7 years, building the walls and rebuilding them, pressing his temple when the worst of it arrived. It was worse now, much worse. He understood why. He had been drawing on her, on the quiet radius she carried without knowing she carried it, as a buffer between himself and the noise. For 3 years, and he had not known the quiet had a source, had not thought to ask. had sat within 5 steps of her every day and drawn from her like a man drinking from a well he has never bothered to look into. She had noticed his left temple, written it down. Wanted to ask Mira and hadn't, because she would have had to explain how she knew. He rode. The blizzard arrived 2 hours east of the last village, dropping visibility to 10 paces and turning the road to a white suggestion. They found a way station. Stone walls, a roof that held over most of it, enough dry wood stacked inside to make a fire. Soren saw to the horses. Finn unpacked supplies with the efficient silence of a man who has sheltered in worse places and not found it worth mentioning. Aldrich built the fire. He was reaching for the flint when his hand closed instead around the ledger. He had taken it from Finn before they left the palace. He did not remember deciding to take it. He sat by the growing fire and opened it. The last page he knew, but turning backward through the transcripts, the careful record of 3 years of council sessions, her clear hand never varying in quality or size, regardless of hour or weather, he found, at intervals, in a lighter ink, notes that were not transcripts. Not about policy, about him. Left temple before right, always. Structural to the curse or tied to emotional content of the session. Reads bottom to top. Prioritizes outcomes he didn't anticipate. Defensive logic. Trust the anomaly. Stopped mid-sentence in the Hartmore discussion, when Velen described the river crossing. Personal memory. Something he recognized. He turned more pages. Does not look at mirrors. He stopped, stared at this for a long time. Left temple. Why always the left first? Beneath it, in slightly different ink, added later, he thought, a question returned to. I should ask Mira. I won't. Finn had settled on the other side of the fire. He was looking at the flames in the neutral way he looked at things he was thinking through. She wrote about my headaches, Aldrich said. She wrote about a great many things. She didn't know why the left temple. She wanted to ask Mira. He closed the ledger. The fire was eating well through the dry wood, filling the small stone space with warmth. Outside, the blizzard had settled into a sustained, steady roar. She didn't ask because she would have had to explain how she knew. Yes. The silence lasted long enough for the fire to shift and resettle. I don't know what color she prefers, Aldrich said. The words arrived in the room with the particular weight of admissions that have been true longer than they've been spoken. Blue, Finn said. Dark blue. She chooses that ink for her personal notebooks, whenever she has the option. Aldrich looked across the fire at him. She mentioned it 3 years ago, asking about supply orders, said the dark blue dried more evenly on certain paper stocks. Finn's voice was even. You were in the room. He did not say reading the border reports. He did not say you weren't listening. He didn't need to. Aldrich turned back to the fire. The snow hammered at the walls, and the fire answered with its steady, indifferent warmth. And he sat with the ledger in his hands and thought about a woman who had written, "Why always the left?" in a margin she thought no one else would ever read. She had come home to a place that no longer fit. Thornmere was smaller than she remembered. The buildings lower, the main street narrower, the orphanage at the eastern edge a diminished version of the fortress it had seemed when she was 8 and 10 and 12. She stood at the gate with her pack and let herself feel the smallness of it, the way it had contracted since she left, or perhaps the way she had grown around the edges of herself without realizing. She had not intended to come here, or she had intended it precisely because she had nowhere else to go, and because the road east led here before it led anywhere else, and because she was tired, and the cold had gotten into her bones somewhere in the last mile, and her chest had been aching for hours, with a directional quality that made no sense. West, something in her sternum kept insisting, like a compass needle that hadn't been told about due north. She found the inn. Berta looked at her once, with the assessment of a woman who has seen most human conditions come through her door, and said, "You look like something the frost brought in. Sit down." The soup was warm. The fire was real. She ate as much as she could before the ache behind her sternum made the idea of eating seem beside the point. "I'll have Agnes look at you," Berta said, taking the bowl. "I'm not ill." Berta looked at her with the particular patience of someone who has heard this before. Cale looked at the fire and didn't argue further. The ache was worse in the night. It had a direction. That was the unsettling thing about it. Not a general ache, but a pointed one, oriented consistently west-northwest, like a compass needle that had found something and refused to let go. She lay in the narrow bed and breathed against it, and told herself it was grief, which she understood and had vocabulary for, which was the body's reasonable response to having been invisible for 3 years, and finally choosing to stop. Agnes came in the morning, small, sharp-eyed, smelling of dried herbs, speaking as directly as if directness were the only language she had ever learned. She took Cale's pulse in both wrists, examined her eyes, pressed 2 fingers below her ribs. "You're not sick." "I know." "You're being pulled." Agnes sat back. "Like a rope, with a weight on the far end. Something you left." She looked at Cale steadily. "Did you lose someone?" "No one I ever had." Agnes was quiet for a moment. Then, more gently than Cale expected, "That kind is sometimes harder." By the second evening, pulled was no longer adequate. She was lying on her back when it began properly, a slow tidal pressure moving outward from her sternum through her bones, like the sea coming in through the foundations of a house. She had experienced grief before, loneliness before. The specific, dull ache of years spent not quite seen by the world. This was different. This was structural, as if something in the physical matter of her had been tethered and was now pulling at the tether with increasing desperation. "West," the compass said. "Now." She pressed her hand over her heart the way she had pressed it against her thigh in the council chamber. Something real, something present, something to ground her. Her pulse under her palm was wrong. Too fast, the wrong rhythm, someone else's panic wearing her heartbeat like borrowed clothes. The room tilted. She reached for the bedpost. Found it. Held on. The last thing she was aware of before the dark came in was the directional pull becoming desperate. A single, sharp, final surge westward, like a fist slamming against a closed door. Then nothing. They came through Thornmere before dawn. 5 miles out, in the frozen dark between the last way station and the first lamplight of the village, the bond had pulsed once, with a desperation that hit Aldrich like a fist to the chest, and then gone completely silent. Not dimmed, not distant. Gone. A sound he had not known he was hearing, suddenly absent, and the absence was worse than any pain the curse had given him in 7 years. He made a sound. He was not entirely conscious of making it. Finn's hand found his arm in the dark. Soren was already looking at him. The horses had slowed because his hands had closed on the reins. "She's—" He could not finish the sentence. He rode. Berta met them at the door in her nightclothes with a candle, her expression moving from outrage to something more cautious in the 3 seconds it took her to assess the man on her threshold, the quality of stillness he carried, and what it meant. She led them upstairs without asking questions that could wait. The room at the top of the stairs. Second door. He went in. Small room, cold. The fire had been out for hours, the grate holding pale ash. One window, with frost furred at the corners. A narrow bed. She was on her side with her knees drawn up, one hand curled near her face on the pillow, dark hair loose across the linen. Too pale. The specific pallor that was not illness, but something like absence, as if the substance of her had been slowly going somewhere else. Her breathing was very shallow. He crossed the room in 2 steps and crouched beside the bed. He put his hand over hers. The warmth was immediate and absolute, going through him like light through a window. Not dramatic, not violent, just the sudden return of something that had been absent long enough to make the body forget it was missing it. The noise in his head, the tidal, unrelenting noise he had been navigating for 7 years, louder since she left, unbearable in the last 24 hours, pulled back. Not gone, manageable. A fire seen through glass instead of standing in it. He breathed out. His whole body moved with it. Her fingers twitched under his. He watched her face. The color returning slowly, the line between her brows smoothing from its strained set. Her chest rising, then falling, then rising again, deeper than before. Her eyes opened, gray-blue. He had been close enough to see this perhaps twice in 3 years, and had not retained the specific color, had not thought to retain it. He retained it now, with the precise, irreversible clarity of things learned too late. She looked at him without focusing, then with focusing, then with the stillness of someone who has found unexpected information in a place they thought they understood. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice rough with sleep and whatever she had gone through, and the formality of it in this small, cold room landed in him somewhere he had not known was unprotected. "Aldrich." He kept his voice even. "My name is Aldrich." She pulled her hand back. The noise swept in, not the full flood, but enough. He did not reach for her hand again. "You shouldn't be here. The kingdom, the betrothal is dissolved. Lady Isolde released me from the contract." A pause. "Why?" "Because she is a perceptive woman who saw what I failed to see for 3 years." He stayed crouched at the level of the bed, refusing the easier distance of standing. "And because the mate bond supersedes political contracts, and she understood this law before I was willing to say it plainly." She looked at him with the directness he had not, until this moment, understood was perpetually aimed at him. Not just now, not just today, but always, in all those sessions, all those hours, all that careful attention from 4 steps distance. He had moved through the beam of her watching for 3 years and never once felt its weight. He felt it now. "You wrote about my left temple," he said. Something moved in her face. "You had a question about it." "You never asked." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to explain how I knew." "I know." He stayed where he was. "You knew which side of the reports I read from. You knew the sound of my voice when I had already decided something. You knew I didn't sleep before campaigns." A pause. "You knew things about me that I have never told anyone, including myself. And I did not know your first name until 6 weeks ago." She held his gaze, did not look away, did not offer him the mercy of looking away. "I know," he said. She sat up slowly, her back against the headboard, hands in her lap. He had moved to the chair by the cold fireplace, keeping the distance she had made when she pulled her hand back, not crossing it. Finn and Soren had disappeared with the quiet efficiency of people who understand when a room belongs to 2 people. "The curse," she said. "It won't stop." "I don't know." "Tell me where it came from." So he told her. Ravenmoor had been a village of 300 people, sitting at the only ford crossable within 40 miles, caught between his forces moving north and a rival clan moving south. He had been 23, newly crowned, and the choice had been clear, in the way that terrible choices are sometimes clear. Let the rival forces reach the crossing and lose the eastern territories and everything that meant, or clear the crossing himself and lose Ravenmoor. He had chosen the mission. He still remembered the exact moment of the order, the clarity of it, the terrible, lucid calm, the understanding that correct strategic decisions could be monstrous, and that understanding this did not change what you did. A woman named Vel had walked out of the burning village and looked at him with eyes that had passed through grief into something beyond it. He did not clearly remember the words. The curse had arrived as sensation rather than language, a sudden, overwhelming flood of other people's pain, with no walls to stop it. Then she had walked away, and he had never found her. He had not tried to find her. He had thought, in the early years, that finding her and asking forgiveness might ease it. He had decided, in some part of himself he had not examined closely, that he did not deserve the ease. You think you deserve it, Kale said. He looked at her. That's what I feel through the bond. She said it quietly, without accusation, the tone of someone reporting what they have observed. You believe you earned this. You hold it deliberately. He did not answer. You're afraid, she said, that if it stops hurting, you'll forget them. The fire was dead. The room was very cold. Outside the window, the darkness at the eastern horizon had acquired a slightly different quality. Not lighter yet, but considering it. You made a choice in an impossible situation, she said. And it was terrible. And it is true that you knew the risk and chose the mission. She did not look away. Carrying the pain forever doesn't bring them back. I know that. You know it, she said. You don't believe it. He looked at his hands, resting on his knees with the stillness he wore in public, in council, in every room where he had held himself together through sheer habit of will. Tell me your version, he said. She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he thought she might not. Then, I was left at the gate of the Thornmere orphanage in the winter. No name, no note. They called me Kaylindra because the matron liked the sound of it. She said this without emotion, the flatness of something said so many times it has been worn smooth. I spent my childhood learning to be useful, not to ask for things, not to take up space, not to become inconvenient, because inconvenient things were removed. A pause. I came to Ashenvale at 20, with good handwriting and an ability to make myself invisible, and I used both of them extremely well for 3 years. He watched her. The lie I told myself was that invisible was safe, that if I didn't ask to be seen, I couldn't be disappointed when I wasn't. She looked at him steadily. Your lie is that you deserve to suffer. Mine was that I deserved to be overlooked. A pause. Both are wrong. He sat with this. I want to show you something, she said. The bond, you're holding it half closed. If I open it fully, then I'll feel what you carry. She held his gaze with the patience of someone who has already calculated the cost and decided to pay it. I have spent 3 years reading people from the outside because no one thought I was worth the direct version. A pause. I would prefer the direct version. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he lowered the wall. He felt her breath catch as it hit her. The full weight of what he had been carrying, the constant presence of other people's emotional weather, and beneath all of it, deeper than all of it, the specific geography of his own guilt. Not one feeling among many. The bedrock, the immovable conviction that enduring was the only adequate response to what he had done. She did not pull back. He felt her through the bond, her response to the flood, which was not resistance, but a deliberate stillness, the way a swimmer doesn't fight a current, but finds the angle through it. He felt her locate the guilt. He felt her understand, from the inside, its shape and its weight and the long years of it. Her hands closed over his. He looked up. Her face was wet. She had not looked away. She was crying and looking directly at him, and she had not looked away. You are allowed to set this down, she said. Something in him cracked. Not the curse, not the walls. The thing beneath them, the thing that had been holding the walls up, the conviction that had been the foundation of 7 years of survival. He could feel it going, like a stone pulled from the base of a dam. He pulled her against his chest. He felt her arms come around him, her hands at his back, her small, steady presence, real, here, here. And he put his face into her hair, and his shoulders were shaking with something he had not been able to do since the curse took him, and she held on and did not let go. I see you, he said, his voice rough and broken. Kalindra, I see you. She pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself be held. The dawn found them there. The first pale light came through the frosted window, crossed the floor in a slow gray line, and found 2 people sitting together in the quiet that had settled in the room like snow settles, gradually, completely, covering everything that had been sharp. He kissed the curve of her neck where it met her shoulder, and she understood what he was asking. And she tilted her head and said yes, in the only language that mattered. No words, just the turning toward. His teeth grazed her skin. The bond closed, not violently, not with pain, but with the irreversible certainty of a door swung shut by its own weight, latch clicking into place, the sound of something becoming permanent. The noise in his head went still, not suppressed, not managed, still. The way a room goes still when a sound you have been hearing so long you forgot it was a sound simply stops. He pulled back to look at her. His eyes had gone gold. She had wondered, sometimes, what that looked like from the outside. Looking at it now, she understood that wondered was inadequate. That no word she had written in any notebook, in any ink, light or dark, could have prepared her for the specific quality of it. Like a fire seen through amber glass. Like something lit from the inside that had always been there, waiting. She looked at him for a long time. They returned to Ashenvale 4 days later, and the court formed opinions. It exercised this right enthusiastically. Cale stood in the receiving hall on the first formal occasion and held still while the opinions formed around her like weather. She was aware of Aldrich at her left shoulder, not holding her arm, not displaying her, simply there, in the specific way of someone who has made a decision and intends the decision to be legible to anyone paying attention. Anyone who looked at his face during that reception reconsidered what they had been about to say. Aldous Crane's formal objections lasted exactly 3 weeks, proceeded entirely through proper counsel channels, and ended on a Tuesday afternoon, when he came to Cale directly in the records room and asked her opinion on the new Northern Border protocols. She gave it, at length. He listened with the expression of a man taking careful inventory. He went away and rewrote 3 sections. He did not formally apologize. She did not formally require it. Lady Isolde Marchant came to say goodbye on a cold morning with frost on the windows and snow coming by afternoon. She found Cale in the courtyard garden, where the groundskeepers had begun the winter pruning, the methodical, necessary work of cutting back what had grown too far beyond its intended shape. "You will be a good queen," Isolde said. "You have been taking notes for years." "You deserved someone who saw you first," Cale said. Isolde considered this with the same careful thoroughness she brought to everything. "Yes," she said, simply, without bitterness. "I will find that person." A pause, her hand resting on the gate. "I think about the balcony sometimes. That night, I was testing you. I know. Did you decide to leave that night?" "I decided I had to leave that night," Cale said. "It's different." Isolde turned this over in her expression until she had it from all sides. Then she nodded. The nod of someone who understands a distinction without needing it explained further. She left with her retinue, her dignity, and the trade agreement Cale had drafted herself, which secured the Western Seaways more completely and more permanently than any marriage contract would have managed. In the records room on the 2nd floor, 2 notebooks sat on the shelf, a ledger with a cracked spine and a small personal journal. Aldrich found the journal on a quiet evening in their rooms. It had been in the bottom of Cale's traveling pack, and she had not thought to hide it because she had not thought anyone would look. He recognized it by the dark blue ink on the cover, the same color Finn had told him about in the way station while the blizzard roared at the walls. He opened it. Most of it was ordinary. Observations, small notes to herself, the private shorthand of a mind that processed the world by writing it down. He turned to the middle, found a page dated 8 months before she left, and read, "I must be more careful." He looked up. Cale was watching him from the chair by the window, her own notebook open in her lap, pen held loosely. She had seen the moment he found it. She had seen the moment he understood. "Careful," he said. Not a question, not quite. She held his gaze. "I thought I was." He looked at the line again, then he crossed the room and sat beside her, and he held the small journal up, showing her the page. showing her that he had read it, showing her that he understood what it had cost her to write it. And he did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that was not already contained in the fact of him being here, in this room, holding this book, having ridden through a blizzard to find the woman who had written it. She took the journal from his hands, set it on the side table beside the ledger with the cracked spine. 2 notebooks, side by side. One that said, "I hope he sleeps well without me," and one that said, "I must be more careful." And both of them wrong, in the way that true things can be wrong when they are spoken too early or too late. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the blue ink. "What?" "I know now that you prefer the dark blue, that it dries more evenly." He paused. "I was in the room when you said it, 3 years ago." She lifted her head to look at him. "I wasn't listening," he said, plainly, without softening it. "I should have been." She looked at him for a long moment, the way she had always looked at him, directly, the beam of her attention at full weight. But now he felt it. Now it had somewhere to land. "You're listening now," she said. The council chamber, months later. Kale sat at the table, not in the corner, not at the edge of the room, but at the table, with her notebook open and her pen in her hand, because the habit of writing helped her think, and she had stopped apologizing for the habits that made her useful. Aldrich was across the table, reviewing the Eastern Garrison reports. He had his head down, brow slightly furrowed, turning pages with the focused attention she had observed for 3 years from a respectful distance. Under the table, his left hand found her knee. He had not announced it, had not looked up from the reports. His hand had simply moved there, the way it moved there in every long council session now. A quiet, specific weight, thumb tracing slow circles against the wool of her dress. Not a gesture for anyone else's benefit. No one else could see it. A private, continuous statement made in the oldest available medium. She wrote a note about the garrison supply lines, crossed out a number, wrote the correct one. His thumb moved. Outside, the first real snow of winter had begun to fall on Ashenvale, soft and steady, covering the gray stones of the courtyard, settling on the sills, building along the high parapets in shapes the wind would rearrange by morning. The kingdom went on, as kingdoms do. Disputes and harvests, and the slow machinery of governing a territory that held several 100,000 people, with their own lives and opinions and complicated feelings, all of it pressing upward through the floors in the way it always had, the way it always would. He pressed her knee once, deliberate, unhurried. She pressed back. He kept reading the reports. The candles burned steady in the still air of the room, and the snow fell outside the high windows, and Kalindra Voss sat at the council table of the kingdom she had been invisible in for 3 years, and wrote in dark blue ink with her steady hand. And the man across the table from her did not look up, because he did not need to. He already knew she was there. If any part of this story lived in your chest a little longer than expected, drop a comment below. Tell me which moment got you, or just say hi. Every comment genuinely makes the next video happen. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for being here.